Hi there, my name is Ayala Connell and I'm a gluten-free and paleo chef, and this is an episode of Simply Paleo with me. Today we're going to be learning how to make paleo focaccia bread. And focaccia bread is a type of bread that is frequently in more Italian cultures. If you go to an Italian restaurant, then a lot of times it's what they serve in the beginning. It's just almost like a pizza crust that's pretty thick and has been seasoned with all types of herbs and spices and then sliced into bread portions. And it's delicious, and it's a perfect vehicle to soak up olive oil and balsamic vinegar and any other type of dip that you have in mind. So we're going to be making focaccia bread today, but we're going to be making it the paleo way, which means no grain at all. So let's get started. So I like to use a KitchenAid mixer because it does a lot of the mixing work for me, but you can definitely use a large bowl if it's your preference. So we have our large bowl here, and we're going to be putting in all of the dry ingredients and mixing them so they get incorporated, and then separately we're going to do the liquid mixture of the liquid ingredients, and then we're going to pour the liquid into the dry and mix it up so that it becomes a batter or a dough for the pizza or focaccia bread. So in this bowl, I have 1.5 cups of cassava flour. Now, for those of you that are new to the paleo lifestyle, cassava flour is a flour that is grain-free. It's actually made from the cassava root. Some of you may be familiar with tapioca starch. Tapioca starch is actually the starch that's been extracted from the cassava root. So cassava flour is the whole root that's made into a flour. And it's a perfect flour vehicle to make a lot of things. Most things you have to mix it with other types of alternative flours to get the right consistency. But if you're making things like tortillas, it's perfect on its own. So we have 1.5 cups of cassava flour, and then we have a cup of arrowroot starch, which is also made from the arrowroot, a root vegetable. And so we're going to mix both of those in here. Okay. And then we've got a couple of other dry ingredients. In here I have 1 teaspoon of sea salt. I typically use fine sea salt when I'm putting it into things, and if I'm sprinkling something on top, I might use more of a coarse Himalayan type. So in here I have a teaspoon of fine sea salt. I have a teaspoon of cracked dried rosemary. Now, rosemary is very easy to find in a dried form, but it can be a little bit off-putting if you get a whole bit of it. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take the rosemary and I'll put it in a mortar and pestle and I'll crush it a little bit, not into a total powder, but just enough so that they're not large chunks or large sort of spears. You can also do it in the palm of your hand just by crushing them with your fingers, whatever works. So we've got a teaspoon of that, and then we've got a teaspoon of onion powder. And today I mixed it up a little bit. There's a wonderful spice store called Penzeys, and they're local to us in Connecticut, but they also have a fantastic website and catalog, and they're really good quality spices and spice blends, and they're not exorbitantly expensive. And they have granulated air-dried shallots, which are a little bit sweeter in this form than the typical onion powder, but just as savory also. So I use a teaspoon of the shallot powder, but you can also interchange it with onion powder. And so what I'm going to do is take those 3 ingredients and mix it into my dry mix. And then I'm going to take the bowl and put it in the KitchenAid mixer stand and turn it on just to get everything incorporated. But if you have a large bowl and a spatula, that's fine too. You can just, we need to re-plug this in. There we go. And we're just mixing it up so that all the ingredients are mixed well before we put our liquid ingredient mixture in there. All right? Okay. Nice and mixed. So now we want to do the liquid mixture. So in this measuring cup, I have a cup of water, which ideally is filtered water of some type, and then I have 1/2 cup of extra virgin olive oil that I've already mixed in here. Now, in addition to this, I want to add 2 eggs. And then what I'm going to do is whisk this separately because I don't want to put all the individual ingredients into the dry batter. I want to really make sure it's already mixed. Not to say that it doesn't work the other way, but this definitely creates more of a consistent batter, which is what you want, so that when you're eating it, it has more of a consistent texture. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to whisk up the 2 eggs, the half a cup of extra virgin olive oil, and the cup of water until it's consistent and incorporated well. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this and I'm going to pour it into my dry mix, as simple as that. All right, and then I'm going to turn this on and create a batter. I'm going to start off low so that the arrowroot and cassava don't go all over the kitchen and all over my clothes. And then as they start to get incorporated, we'll go to medium. Now, if you're doing it in a bowl, just mix it up until it's a smooth pizza dough batter consistency. And it's looking fantastic. Now, if you're using a KitchenAid mixer, partway through, what you want to do is scrape it down, because sometimes there's bits of the dry mix that's stuck onto the paddle and kind of covered up by some of the batter. So it's helpful to scrape it down, or you can just turn it off and just mix it some more with a spatula by hand, but we're going to just use the mixer. And we're just putting it on again. Okay. Now, this batter is not a typical pizza dough batter in the sense that it's a little bit stickier than what someone would be used to with a more, glutinous pizza batter. So we're just going to take this off and then I'll show you the consistency. Now, before I did this, I preheated the oven to 425, and while I preheated it, I actually took the baking sheet, or the half baking sheet that I was using, and I put it in the oven before I turned it on, and then I preheated the oven with a baking sheet inside. And the idea is to try to get the baking sheet to be really hot so that the pizza crust can get a little crispy on the bottom. It's kind of like using a pizza stone, and you can certainly do this on a pizza stone. Just make sure you're using parchment paper, because as I said, this does get a little sticky. So let's show you this batter. I'm going to bring it closer to the video, and you can see that it's a sticky batter, but it's not wet, it's not liquidy. And what we're going to do is we need to roll it out. You can put it on parchment and then just use oiled or wet fingers to spread it out. But what we're going to do is we're going to put another piece of parchment paper over it, and we're going to just use a rolling pin. Now, it's a little bit of a awkward process sometimes because the parchment paper can get a little mobile. So first we want to just get the batter onto the parchment paper. So I have 2 pretty much equal size sheets of parchment paper. Before I put the baking sheet in the oven, I measured the parchment paper to make sure that it was the right size. Okay. All right. So now we've got this ball of dough, and I could use wet oiled fingers to spread it out into the shape that I want, but instead I'm just trying to get all this good stuff off. There we go. I'm going to just take another sheet of parchment paper and put it over. All right, now that I got the goop off my finger. So I've got my other sheet of parchment. I'm going to flatten it down a little and start the work with my hands. Now, you want the focaccia dough to be a little bit more thicker than a typical pizza crust, because that's kind of the way that you can enjoy it better. So now I'm just going to take my rolling pin and I'm just going to gently create a smoother consistency. Okay. And try to get it the shape that I want, which is somewhat rectangular. I'm not being a perfectionist here, but I'm going to try to get it to be the shape of the baking sheet, essentially. You don't have to worry about having extra crust because the whole thing is a crust, right? That's the idea. And if you get a little bit that comes off the parchment paper, it's not a big deal. We can fix it after. Okay, so now we've got the parchment paper that's spread over and everything's rolled out. So the next step is to get the hot baking sheet. So wait right here. Here's your little blooper. I'm going to run and get the baking sheet from the oven, which is in the other room, because my kitchen is not so conducive to having a camera. So here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the hot baking sheet on here, and I'm going to take my pizza, and this is a fun little process, get it right on there. And I'm just going to get it in there, and then I'm going to take the top layer of the parchment paper and take it off. Now you can also take the top layer off before you move the pizza or the focaccia dough onto it. That's fine too. But once you have it here, then you can get it to be a little bit smoother. You can spread down the sides that might have been rolled out too far wide. Either way is fine, but just be careful because that baking sheet is a little bit hot, right? And I'm just going to spread it out. Now, if you have a little bowl of water or oil, you can wet your fingers or wet your spatula, which is a good way to do it too. And that's it. And now what we're going to do is take the remaining teaspoon of crushed rosemary that's been dried, and also a half a teaspoon of more coarse sea salt, or if all you have is fine, that's fine too. But I have the Himalayan coarse sea salt, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to sprinkle it on top. And this is what gives it that incredibly flavorful taste. There's all that salt on top that's so good for you. The sea salt has so many wonderful minerals, and then you really don't have to worry about the sodium issue, because when you're eating sea salt, there's such a balance of minerals, and sodium is not the overpowering mineral in the mix. And then you've got the rosemary that's so flavorful, and there you go. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to put it in the oven. So I'm going to do that after we talk and finish this video, because I made a focaccia bread beforehand. And I want you guys to get a sense of what it looks like. So it's beautiful. It's got the rosemary and salt. It's so fragrant. So we are going to cut it into slices and see what it tastes like. So let's see. This just came out of the oven, and you can see how it's slightly thick. And let's see here. All right, we're going to take a taste test. You can see how it's thick, and it's got the wonderful seasoning on top, and it is so fragrant. So delicious. It's crispy on all the surfaces, and inside it's a little bit of that doughy, delicious, soft, warm texture. As you take a bite, you get some of that Himalayan sea salt and the rosemary, which is so, so wonderfully flavorful in your mouth. And then, of course, you get some of that onion powder flavor with the rosemary inside. It's so delicious. Really yummy. This is a perfect accompaniment to so many different meals. So good. My kids were very excited to hear that I was doing focaccia bread for the video today, because of course that means we're having 2 layers of focaccia bread with our dinner. They were very excited because it's so delicious. And if you make it in advance, you can then just put it in the oven to heat on 325, 350, and just heat it up again. It'll get a little crispy on the outside, but it'll get nice and warm again on the inside. And then just cover it up until you're ready to serve. And you can slice it in any way that you want. Pizza wedges, squares, anything. So So I'm glad you watched. I hope you make this recipe at home. It's a pretty simple recipe. Everything goes into the bowl, and then you lay out the dough, and then you get this delicious focaccia bread. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. Any wish lists you have, any cravings, any questions, you can check me out on my blog at www.simplypaleo.com. And I hope to hear from you. And stay tuned for more episodes of Simply Paleo. And you can see lots of wonderful recipes and cooking demonstration videos on my blog as well. So take care.